بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. So we have a very important class tonight, actually, talking about some common transactions, buying and selling stuff. So it's going to be very important, inshallah. Things that people do not know. And I think maybe it could be one of our very important classes tonight. So we're going to be talking about which transactions are not allowed in Islam. Yesterday we talked about the conditions of the transaction. Now, what transactions or trade deals or agreements are not valid in Islam? Number one, many people do not know this, to buy or sell after the azan of Jummah. Buying or selling right after the adhan of Jumu'ah is not allowed, because Allah made it clear, إِذَا نُودِيَ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمُعَةِ فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear that go to the prayer of Jumu'ah and do not do any transactions. He says it very clear, ذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. Even if you are, let's say, in the middle of a transaction and you hear the adhan, you stop it, go to Jum'ah, finish, and then come back. And I know a lot of Muslim grocery stores, for example, they are still open. All these transactions are not halal, by the way. And the money they get from it is not halal until Jum'ah is finished. So after the adhan for Jum'ah, any transaction is not allowed. So this is the time when buying and selling is not allowed.
So the ayah specifically talks about people who hear the Jummah. What if in situations whereby, number one, you don't hear and maybe you're going to a different time Jummah? So for example, there's one at 1:30 and you're going for the one at 2:30.
I mean, first of all, having multiple Jum'ahs in one masjid is a questionable thing, to be honest. I am not a big fan of that. There should be only one Jum'ah. So, because that creates problems as well. Because the thing is, we are talking about an ideal situation when you can hear the adhan. But even if you cannot hear the adhan, you know the time has started. So, I mean, we have phones today, and the phones even call the adhan.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you're saying that after Jummah, it's okay? It's because normally if I go on Fridays to the masjid I go to, they sell like plates of food after the service. So is that haram?
No, that's after. We're talking about between the time or the service or the prayer starts until it ends. That is the time when we're not supposed to be buying or selling anything.
Okay, because I was confused. Okay, thank you, Sheikh.
Yeah, no problem. Right after is okay. Once it's finished, as a matter of fact, the next ayah, the next verse says, once the prayer is finished, then go back to your work. Go back to work and continue what you stopped doing. But this is very important that as soon as you know the time has started, you stop, you close everything, and you go to the Jum'ah prayer. And once you're done, you go back, continue doing whatever you were doing before. So a lot of people do not know this. And I think they should know this, because this money is not halal what they're making. They're buying and selling during a time that is prohibited. Now, for women, because they're not entitled to go to Jum'ah, it's not fard for them, it's not an obligation, it's still not recommended, because when they go to buy, normally the seller can be a man. So don't give them business. Unless you're going to buy from another woman, then that's a different story. Okay. Anyway, but this is a time when buying and selling transactions are not allowed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it very clear, stay away from transaction during that time. And the time starts from the adhan until the end of the prayer, salah. Once that is finished, you can go back to doing whatever you were doing. So, number one, as we said, transactions during the time of Jummah. Number two, to sell something that is not necessarily haram. We're not talking about selling pork, for example. Something that is halal to sell, but you know that it's going to be used in a haram way. For example, you're selling grapes, that's halal, but you know that the one who's buying the grapes is going to make wine out of it. Then you don't sell him the grapes. You don't even sell cups or glass to a winery or a place that they sell wine or some, as long as you know. If you do not know, you are not responsible for doing an investigation and ask, what are you going to use this for? That's not your job. So let's say I have whatever, a shop that I sell cups and stuff like that. So somebody comes to buy cups from me. By default, of course, if we're living in a Muslim country, we're not going to ask questions. What are you going to use these cups for? So we assume that he's going to use it in a halal way. But if you know for sure that this person owns a bar, or he sells wine, and there is a big chance he's going to use these things in his business, then you're not supposed to sell it to him. And that, by the way, one brother came and asked me the question. He was selling I think a gas station, and he himself does not sell beer in the gas station. And these are very few in Texas, I think. Most of them do, they do sell beer or cigarettes or anything like that. So he said, I'm going to sell it to someone, but I know him, he's going to get beer and cigarettes and all this lottery and stuff. So should I sell it to him? I said, no, because you know for sure, for certain, he's going to use it in a haram way. If he does not tell you, you don't ask, how are you going to use it? But if he tells you, or you know for sure he's going to use it this way, then you do not sell it to him. So this is very important. Today's class is very important because it addresses our daily life. I think we should try to make sure people know these things. Number two. Number three, to sell something which was already sold, which means what? Like I come to Brother Sudagar and I say, I'm going to buy this burger from you for $5. He said, okay, I agree. And then somebody comes, Sister Joanna comes because she wanted the burger. She said, I'll give you $7 for it. He already said yes to me. He cannot say yes to her. So this is called baya ala al-baya, al-baya ala al-baya, to sell over selling, meaning you already sold the item and we agreed, you did not give it to me yet, right? And this happens a lot, especially with cars. You go to buy a car and you agree on the price and everything, and then somebody comes and say, I'll give you more. Khalas, you already gave your word to the first guy. You can't do that. That's not allowed in Islam. And that goes for selling as well, buying as well. The same way. You're going to buy, same story. I come to Brother Sudagar to buy a burger from him, and I already agree with him. And then another person comes and say, I'll sell you the same burger for a cheaper price. I already agreed. Can't do that. So this is buying over buying or selling over selling. Once you agreed, you can't do that.
So what if it wasn't a burger? What if it was medication and I needed it more? I had a diabetes or something.
No, that's different. If it's a matter of need, yes, it's not a matter of price, but you cannot change the price. And still, once the agreement is done, you can ask the buyer if he agrees to let it go, because once the deal is already agreed on, you cannot come and change that. Again, because see, this can be abused a lot of times. How do you know how maybe maybe both are needy or they need that item? So this is, again, makes things difficult. Once the agreement is finalized, then nothing can be changed unless both parties are okay with it. So basically, I buy this medication and then you come and say, you know what, I really need this medication, maybe more than you, and I say, okay, fine, you can have it. That is fine. But other than that, to pay more to get it, or sometimes you pay more to get it earlier, to be given the priority, all these things are not allowed.
So what if I find something like I'm shopping for clothes and I find something for a cheaper price and I've already agreed to pay this, but I found it for $10, $15 cheaper? How does that work?
So you already agreed to buy it and then you found it somewhere else cheap for a cheaper price. If you already agreed, you can tell that person that I found it for a cheaper price. Can you please give it to me cheaper? But if he says no, you agreed. So you should be looking for prices before you agree. So that's why it's important. And for example, I wanted to go buy a necklace or some clothing for my wife. So I went to the first shop, and I'm a terrible shopper, by the way, because I get bored quickly. The first thing I find, I take it and I go. I don't have patience with shopping stuff. So he tells me the price. I say, okay, wait, let me go ask around, and I'll come back. So I did not agree yet. This is okay. And normally they know the market, and they will drop the price by themselves. When you tell them that, I'm going to go ask around, and he knows that somebody else might have the same item for a cheaper price, so they will say, okay, I'll give it to you for a cheaper price. But if you already agreed, why are you asking after you have already agreed? You should ask before you have already made up your mind. So this is important.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
You are welcome. So we're still talking about things, transactions that are not allowed in Islam. Something called baya al-Eenah, which means what some people do, and this is how they play with the rules. I go to somebody and I say, I'm gonna sell you this car for $5,000 over 6 months, for example. Okay? Now, I did not give him the car, and he did not give me the money. And then I'll say, I'm going to give you 4,000 to buy the car from you back. I'm going to give it to you cash. So basically, it's kind of riba interest, but in a kind of tricky way. I sell you the car, $5,000, for example, over 6 months or over a year, and I don't give you the car. I buy it from you, and I give you $4,000 less. So now you have to give me 5,000 over a year, but I gave you 4,000. This is basically interest. Wa alaikum salam. This is called bay'ul Eenah. It's like playing with the rules, and this is not allowed. This is what the Prophet ﷺ says. When people do this, tabayatum bil Eenah, when people start doing this, you became followers instead of leaders, and you abandon jihad, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you go through humility until you go back to the right Islam. So this is always the way it is. The next transaction which is not allowed in Islam, and we talked about this before, when I buy something from you and you still did not give it to me and then I sell it, you can't sell something you do not own. So this is important. You cannot sell something which you do not own. Next transaction which is not allowed is called an najish, which means something like an auction. You increase the price not because you want to buy, but you want to make it difficult for somebody else. So basically, let's say there is an auction and they're trying to sell something, and maybe it's mine, but people do not know it's mine, and then somebody wants to buy it and he gives a price and then I give a higher price. So he can give a higher price to bid over me. So I keep increasing the price to make it basically to make it look like it's more expensive because I want to make more money. Of course, this is not allowed. So these are the transactions that are not allowed in Islam, and this is important for us to know. The next matter is something called al-iqala fil baya. Iqala means forgiveness. What does that mean? We conducted the deal, everybody signed, the deal is over, okay? I am okay with it, the buyer is okay, the seller is okay, everything is finalized. And then the buyer later on realized that he doesn't want it. And for no reason really, he just doesn't want it, or he cannot afford it anymore. Now the seller does not have to let him go because it's finalized, it's Islamically correct, everything is correct. The seller is not entitled to return it, but he does return it for the sake of Allah. This is called al-iqala. You forgive for the sake of Allah. You don't have to return it because everything is finalized according to Islam. But then the buyer comes and he says, I'm sorry, this happened. I don't want it anymore. Please, can you return it? The Prophet ﷺ says, whoever does that, man aqala musliman bay'atah. Whoever forgives a Muslim after this contract is finalized, Allah will forgive him on the Day of Judgment. So it's a big deal. And Allah always wants us to be forgiving, especially if the seller does not have to sell it like it's not an emergency. So this is important. Next, something called aqdul murabaha. Again, this is interesting and important. People do it. So let's say I want to buy something, but I'm not really good at buying. So I send somebody to buy it for me. So that person goes and he buys it and he asks me to give him more money for what he did. This is allowed. This is allowed. So let's say I want to buy a car, but he has to tell me. He has to tell me. So basically, I want to buy a car. So I send somebody, say, please go buy me a car. So he goes and he buys a car. He comes back and he says, I paid for this car $10,000 and I want $1,000 for me. In this situation, it is allowed.
The sheikh is kind of broker.
Like a broker. Yeah, because he has some broken bones.
Yeah. Like you buying a house, so you have the real estate agent is working in the
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good example, yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
So that's allowed.
Yeah,
Inshallah. Yeah. Now, next is again a very important thing, which is buying buying something with in portions, finances. Basically, you pay an amount every month. This is important, especially when people buy a car or a house or something like that. What are the conditions for financing in Islam? In general, it is allowed. Financing is allowed in Islam. But there are conditions for this. Now, first of all, is it okay to increase the price because the person is not paying cash? Like a person who says, I'll sell you this car for 10,000 if you pay cash, and or 12,000 if you pay over 2 years, for example. This is allowed. You can increase the price because now it's in portions, is not one-time payment. So because you're going to lose money over time, so you can ask for more money if it's going to be financed. But what are the conditions for this to be allowed? Number one, you have, of course, the seller has to own the item. I cannot sell you something which I do not own. Again, this is the same condition. And he has to have it, as we said. There is no pre-order in Islam. The seller has to have the item with him. Number two, and this is very important, there is no penalty for a delayed payment, because that is riba. So basically, I sold you the car over 12 months, and 1 month you had some kind of problem and you delayed the payment. I cannot charge you more because that is riba. I cannot ask you because you delayed the payment, you're going to have to give me 10% more. That is riba, and that is not allowed. At the same time, the buyer should not delay the payment for no good reason. That's haram too. So this works both ways. If I was the seller, the buyer should not delay giving me my money every month as we agreed, unless he's got something really important, he couldn't do it that month and he delayed it, and he will tell me and I will accept that, but the amount should not change. Otherwise it's riba. So I think unfortunately this condition makes all financing not allowed. Because today, if you buy a car, you agree if you delay the payment to pay extra, riba.